Today, we're going to talk a little bit about choosing managed service providers. And I know that can seem a little bit meta considering, I work for a managed service provider. But the idea here is that, managed service providers can be different. We all offer different things. I kind of look at the world of managed service providers more like a Harry Potter sorting hat than competing with each other. Like, I really don't see others as competition because I truly believe there's a right fit for every business out there if you're looking for a provider. So I don't really worry about what others are offering. I just like helping customers get to the correct provider for them. I won't always be the best provider, and they're not always the right customer for me. So this is some of the stuff that I would use as my criteria if I were out choosing a provider. So I guess first up, let's talk about what an MSP generally is. Managed service providers are typically, or at least in the context that we talk about them, they're IT companies that exist to provide services to other businesses. The objective almost universally is we can provide IT support or security support or some type of technology support so the other business can focus on whatever it is they do best, right? Doctors' offices should be good at helping people. Accounting offices should be good at accounting. Lawyers should be good at lawyering. IT companies are good at IT. So if we all specialize and focus on the things we're best at, we can all get more done in our day and not have to worry about the stuff we're bad at. The managed services business model is generally billed monthly. Contract durations will vary. MSPs are getting kind of pinched by a lot of vendors as regards to contract terms and things like that. So I think over time, you're going to see definitely more pushes towards 1, 3, 5-year contracts even. Some of it is just because, it makes life easier from an accounting perspective for everybody. But also, our vendors are asking us to commit to 1-year, 3-year terms to get the pricing that we want to pass on. So we have to get the same level of commitment back from a customer. But typically, you're on a monthly agreement with us or an annual agreement or something like that, and we provide a set of services. And usually there'll be a combination of some type of monitoring, so we're watching over stuff, some type of reactive support if we see things broken, some level of technical support, so if your staff need help, and some level of proactive maintenance. Now, there's going to be a large variety and array of services people offer, but understanding that this combination of criteria is what generally equals an MSP. Pricing models. Again, this is going to vary quite a bit. Different MSPs price things a little bit differently. Some are by device, some are by user, some are, just flat rates based on what they have a perceived level of support at. Some are a mix of all of it, honestly. But usually you're going to see a few different basic formats. There's going to be an all-you-can-eat offering typically where we say, hey, for X dollars a month, I will do these 5 things or these 10 things for this many devices and people. And it won't vary, right? As long as your request is within that scope of work, the monthly rate is the monthly rate, and that's it. The idea behind that is some months you'll need more support, some months you'll need less, but across the term of the contract, everybody kind of wins. The main benefit to the customer is it's easy to budget, right? You don't have to worry about 1 month having to spend $10,000 and 1 month having to spend $1,000. You just kind of spend $5,000 every month, and things stay that way. Some agreements are time and material based. So if you're in a position where you think that makes more sense, or the provider you go with just prefers that methodology, it'll be, hey, I'm just going to charge you per hour that I do work. That means that if something very bad happens and it gets really complicated 1 month, you could have a really large bill. But it also means some months, if you don't need any help, you have a very small bill. Organizations often want things paid in advance. It simplifies the response time issue. So they might offer block time where you can buy 50 hours or 20 hours ahead of time and just call in and use them as you need them. And then there was also going to be usually some professional services components, right? That's really not part of managed services. Usually professional services is more akin to server upgrades or implementation of new technology where we say, okay, we're going to upgrade you from your old 2012 R2 servers to 2019, and it's going to cost you $10,000 or something like that, and they'll take care of that work, and then you pay. Some are a mix and match of these, right? They'll say, we have a flat rate to cover your basic needs, like monitoring your infrastructure, and then it's time and material on top of that. There's some mixing and matching. I've been an advocate for all you can eat for a long time. It's just easier for everybody. It keeps the MSP a little more honest. They have an incentive to do good. They don't want to put in a ton of labor, so they keep your stuff working well. You have a flat monthly rate that makes your life easier to manage. Everybody kind of knows where we are and we have something to kind of measure against. So if I'm given the option, I try to flat rate and do all you can eat for pretty much everything. But ultimately, it's up to you and your provider what you think is best. So, what do MSPs usually include in some of these packages? Like I said before, it'll vary, but typically you're going to see some level of device support. So, this is stuff like monitoring your workstations, your laptops, your servers, cloud infrastructure. Typically, it'll include some kind of patch management to make sure updates are getting deployed to devices. It'll include some kind of endpoint security, whether it's monitoring Windows Defender, whether it's pushing out an EDR, something like that. It'll typically have some type of remote monitoring and management or access tool so they can remote in when you need help and just monitor the health of your devices, right? Looking for event log errors, looking for problems, things like that. There'll typically be a human support element, right? Most of the problems we run into now are human side errors. They're not that necessarily people are doing things wrong, but maybe people have questions on how something works, or there's a problem with the software the person is using, an error in Microsoft Word, a printer not working, some kind of interface issue. The days of a ton of patches breaking desktops aren't gone, but they're far fewer now than they used to be. So the device support side of things is thankfully becoming less and less of an issue. But the human side of things, because there's now more tools that people are using, more interactions, more integrations, that becomes a little bit harder now. So you'll see more support, human support focus elements. Security is top of mind for everybody. So everybody will have a mix and match of security stacks. It could be an EDR, an MDR, an XDR. It could be something like Auto Elevate or Threat Locker or any of those other like PAM tools. It could be any number of security elements that they may think you need, and rightfully you may. And then you get into things like your software licensing, Microsoft 365, your MFA tools like Duo, all that kind of stuff. And then we continue rolling into things like backups, right? Do you need on-site backups? Do you need off-sites? Do you need disaster recovery? Do you need business continuity planning help? All these things are things that typically get bundled in under an MSP. And then there's a managed network element. Different MSPs handle this differently, but your firewall management, your switches, your access points, routers, if you have them separate, all this type of stuff still needs monitoring. They need firmware upgrades. They need management in case you need changes. So MSPs can offer a whole slew of things. And it's really important that as you start comparing offerings that you're trying to figure out which ones are actually offering you what, right? It's at times kind of hard to do an apples to apples comparison because MSP A might offer you, everything on this list, and their price might be really high as a result because they're offering you a lot of stuff. And there is a difference between like maybe a traditional antivirus, like that they're going to call endpoint security, and an MDR product. The deliverable is different, the quality of the tool is different, and as a result, the cost is different. So understanding what the offering is when you're comparing it to somebody else is really, really important. Now, figuring out which one is right for you is the hard part because every MSP is probably going to say their offering is the correct offering for you. Some might just say, hey, we don't think we're a good fit. And that's an honest answer and hopefully the truth. But what you'll want to be looking for as far as finding the partner that's best for you is a couple of things. One, does the maturity of the MSP match the maturity of your organization? And this takes a bit of self-awareness, right? If you're going for a high maturity MSP, it generally means that they're going to have fairly set and strict processes and requirements. They're going to expect you to have things that are within the expected life of the hardware and software you're using. They're probably not going to allow you to have end of life software running. They're not going to say, okay, you have Server 2008, that's no big deal. They're going to say, you have to upgrade to something that's within the supported life cycle. 10-year-old desktops, probably not okay. You got to get something that's probably within warranty or the expected life of the hardware or have some type of contingency in place. From a process perspective, like, are you a very organized, tightly scheduled organization, or do you prefer just kind of maybe a lower, less methodical planning mechanism, more kind of take things as they go type of organization? You're going to want to find somebody who matches the vibe of your company. Otherwise, you just get into conflict all the time. And neither are right or wrong, to be honest, right? It's not like one is better than the other. They just have to be the same. Otherwise, you're going to get frustrated with how the provider does stuff, and the provider is going to get frustrated with how you do stuff. You want to look for MSPs that have some level of familiarity with your industry or your vertical, right? And it's not because like technology for most businesses of the same size is pretty similar. But what you'll lose if you don't find somebody who's familiar with your vertical is that specialization. If you're a not for profit and you work with an MSP who's familiar with not for profits, they probably have better availability to help you find things like grants or better things to help find like how to navigate charitable donations and things like that. If you're in the construction industry, they're going to have more familiarity with project planning tooling and maybe your invoicing tooling and things like that. Maybe how to set up temporary offices on remote sites. So find someone who has a little bit of vertical knowledge. And sometimes people get weirded out by this because they get worried that their MSP might be dealing with one of their competitors and the implications of that. Most MSPs are pretty good about not letting that type of stuff interfere with their business. We're here as a business partner. We don't really have interest in causing problems between people who are in the same space, in the same geography. That's not our business. So I wouldn't really worry too much about that, but understanding that, hey, finding somebody in your vertical and into your industry probably is an advantage to you. Be mindful about what you really need as a business. What kind of support do you need versus what do you want? Most MSP, you're never going to find like a perfect fit, right? Or you might find a perfect fit, but the cost is going to be huge. So be really truthful about what you need. Sit down, talk with your coworkers, your colleagues, figure out what it is that you guys really value in IT. And that'll help you find like a fit for an MSP who can meet those needs, right? Like you might get like an 80% match. And as long as that 80% of the stuff you really, really care about, it's going to be a good relationship. If you're looking for 100% perfect, I think you're going to struggle and you're going to end up running into a cost issue probably. Prices are going to vary greatly, right? Like some MSPs will come in really, really cheap. Some are going to come in really, really expensive. Most will settle right around the same place because we're all dealing with the same costs, right? We have similar tooling. We're paying for the same similar licensing. We're not making huge margins reselling hardware and software. We're after the same talent pool typically. And if we're all paying fair wages, then the market is dictating that rate pretty closely. So there is some you get what you pay for. A more premium service is generally going to cost more. You should expect more out of that, more money. If you see somebody drastically lower, you really have to be skeptical about what they're offering and why they're able to get the price that low. But go out, get a few bids, see where it sort of settles, and then figure out what the differences are. But really, the best way to control your costs is to understand your needs. I've met with a lot of clients who are like, we need, 15-minute response all the time. I need somebody on site every day. And realistically, they don't need that stuff. During an emergency, yeah, they need 15-minute response. And it's nice to have someone on site, but it's really expensive and inefficient to have somebody just coming on site for fun. And, I'm usually happy to provide that stuff, but it's going to come with a cost because you're driving me to be less efficient. MSPs are able to keep their prices under control by being efficient and scaling. If you're saying, hey, I don't want you to be efficient, I want you to send somebody on site every day, no matter what, whether I need them or not, you're going to get the least efficient billing model possible, and that's the most expensive one for you. So really try to figure out what you want out of that relationship, where the most benefit to you is, and focus on those items and be willing to kind of trade off on the things you don't care about as much, and that'll keep your pricing kind of under control. As you scale up, you might want to look at a co-managed option. I think there is absolutely a point where most businesses benefit greatly from having an on-site IT person. And I don't think that being a employee of the MSP is even always the best idea. One, it's more expensive, right? Because you're paying the overhead to another business to manage your employee. But two, you lack some of that continuity and familiarity with your company. So I like co-managed agreements. I like when businesses get to a size where they really want an IT person in-house who can be very familiar with their needs, their infrastructure, and help drive that vision internally. And then we work with them to kind of enhance their capability, right? Maybe the MSP does like the really low level stuff like patching, endpoint security, monitoring, and all this stuff. And they might even take on some of the really high end stuff like engineering and new server rollouts and that stuff. And the in-house team is able to then focus on the end user experience. So there's all kinds of combinations and matches that you can do in a co-managed format. So if you feel like you do want somebody on site and you have the budget to support an on-site person all the time and an MSP, look for a good co-managed pairing. It can work out really, really well. It solves a lot of the problems of like the lone IT person where they don't really have anyone to go to. They don't really have peers because if you're the only IT person, you're the only IT person. They can work with the MSP closely and get some of that validation, that sounding board that they might need. and you get the continuity of a business who's familiar with your organization. So, if that IT guy wins the lottery and decides not to come to work tomorrow, you're kind of set up and safe as a company too. So this co-managed concept, very, very helpful, definitely worth exploring. The main key to success in co-managed, from my perspective, is just really hammering out what the scope of responsibilities are per group, right? If what is the MSP's responsibility, what is the internal person's responsibility, and how do they communicate with each other so they're not stepping on each other's toes and undermining each other? Ultimately, everybody is there to serve the business, and that's just really what has to be focused on. So you go through that practice and you're thinking, okay, it's time to kind of hire your first MSP. So what do? Call a bunch, honestly. You're going to want to talk to a couple, 2, 3, 4, maybe. You don't need to talk to 50. Just pick a few bigger ones in your area. Talk to peers in your industry. See who they use and see how they're liking it, right? Not all of them are going to be a good fit. You're going to get weird vibes from some. That's okay. Just don't talk to them anymore. And some might say, hey, we don't think we're a good fit for you. That's okay too. This is about understanding who is good and bad and finding that right pairing, right? It's like a sorting hat. It's not everybody's good for everybody. Any MSP who says they're perfect for every customer is lying to you. We all understand what we're good at, some better than others, and are willing to say, hey, this is just not my strong suit, so I'm going to pass on this opportunity. We appreciate the call, but we're not going to be able to do what you want, and we don't think we're the best fit. Maybe call this other company. I refer customers to all kinds of other MSPs because I'm not the best fit for everybody. Most MSPs will probably want to do some kind of assessment. If an MSP shows up and just says, here's the price, and they haven't looked at your network or really talked to you, I'd be very, very skeptical about what they're trying to deliver. It's kind of like a first date, right? You want to get to know people. We want to understand what we're getting into. We want to see what the red flags are. We want to know that we can actually provide value. Some MSPs will charge you for this assessment. If they're charging you for the assessment, I think it's reasonable to expect some kind of deliverable, like a written set of recommendations or an inventory or some type of audit that says, hey, here's where we believe you are. If they're not charging you for it, I don't think it's fair to expect that. You're not paying for anything. It just comes down to who's getting the most value out of that assessment. Is it the MSP doing it because the MSP wants to give you a price that they believe is fair and make sure they can actually support you? That's completely fair. They probably shouldn't charge you for that. If they're showing up and the assessment has inherent value where they're going to give you a set of recommendations and say, hey, you guys said you need to be CMMC compliant. You guys said you want to be PCI compliant. You guys said you want to be, want to move to this other point in time in the future or this point of maturity. Here's what we think you need to do to get there. That's worthwhile and worth paying for. You can then take those recommendations and shop it around. And then you have to kind of think through the onboarding perspective, right? There's no, if it's your first MSP and you've never really had an IT person, it's pretty straightforward. They'll give you a timeline, they'll deploy their tools. It's not a big deal. But generally, I would expect anywhere from a week to a month, maybe even longer if you're a really large organization or they're deploying a lot of stuff. So talk through that onboarding timeline and that process, but understand it's not instant. It's usually not sign contract and then tomorrow you're onboarded and fully supported. It's a process. And the reason for that is they don't want to break anything. Deploying all this new tooling, they're monitoring, it can be noisy, it can be chaotic if it's done incorrectly. So most providers need to take their time. They want to make sure patches don't break stuff. They want to make sure their tools don't break your tools. There's some fitting that needs to happen. So talk through the onboarding process and try to understand what's going on, and I think you'll be in pretty good shape. If you're replacing an existing MSP, there's a few more things you need to do. And this can be often what we see is it's like a true MSP where they're a large organization, they're doing all this stuff. But more often than not, it's maybe a friend who's like an IT person who was helping you when you started your business. Or, maybe it was a smaller MSP and you just kind of outgrew them. And that happens. It's normal. Like there's different levels of MSPs. As your maturity goes up, you probably need to find a more mature MSP. It's just all part of it. So be ready for it. We run into a lot of cases where people aren't emotionally ready to make that break. So we go through the process of these assessments, these quotes, and they know they need to move forward, but they're just not ready to tell their friend that they're not going to use them anymore, or they're not ready to tell the other MSP who didn't do anything wrong. They just aren't capable of moving the business forward anymore. And that gets really hard. It is kind of like a breakup at times. So, think through it, make sure you're ready to make the move. Most MSPs are professional, right? Like it's rare to run into MSPs, at least the ones I work with, where people are going to be anything more than just disappointed. Usually, if you say, hey, we're going to move to somebody else, the good MSPs internalize that and feel bad because they think they did something wrong. There are going to be a few ones out there that get really mad and bitter, but most of us are professional. We understand it's business. We understand that at times this happens and we need to help migrate to another MSP. So it's okay to be honest about these transitions, and we'll be professional and help each other. We've all lost customers. We don't like it, but we also know that we're not about to try to damage somebody for making that decision. That's never going to make anything better. If you tell your MSP that you're leaving and they do respond really poorly and start being reckless, and I've seen it happen, you made the right choice, right? Like they're showing their true colors at that point, and it was going to happen eventually. So at least now it's happening when you already have an exit strategy. But in like when I make these recommendations, when we're onboarding a client from an existing MSP, I ask them to just introduce us. I try to work really well with all the other MSPs in my area. I have no bad blood with any of them. And we usually take the lead. We say, hey, we'd like to do the transfers on these dates. We come up with a game plan where we can all work together and make the transition smooth. And when we sort of go on for there. For you, be part of that conversation, but let the MSPs work out the technicalities, right? Set timelines, set expectations, make sure the old MSP has permission from you in writing to give the new MSP the data and the access they need. Once everything is kind of done, have a final handoff call and just say, okay, is everything transferred? Is anything left? What's going on? And make sure everything has been smoothly handed off, documented properly by the new MSP, and that you've given the free and clear to the old MSP and say, hey, thanks for everything you did. We're officially done. Pay your final invoice with them and just wrap that all up nicely. And make sure you're keeping your staff in the loop. It gets really awkward and frustrating for everybody when you've canceled services with one MSP and your staff continue to call them because they didn't know or they didn't get the new phone number. And it just makes for an awkward experience for your team because they're frustrated. They don't know who to call. They have something broken and they need, but they don't know how to get help anymore. So work with the new MSP to do a real onboarding, retrain your staff, do all that kind of stuff. Now, if things go sour, it sucks. We call them hostile takeovers. You know, if you have a current MSP and they're just not cooperating really well, this is rare, but it does happen. Try to figure out how to get out of it, first and foremost. A lot of times this comes down to like financial disputes, right? Like usually what starts these things is maybe the existing MSP didn't follow through on a project and you're just frustrated and now there's something holding it up. Maybe the MSP believes you owe them money. Maybe they believe that you're at fault for a project failing and there's some thing just causing a riff. Think about if that thing is worth the damage it's going to do during the transition, right? Like I've seen MSPs hold grudges over small amounts of money, a couple of $1,000s, and the customer just be unwilling to pay them. And I understand the principle of it, but the net result is you're going to damage your business and give everybody that big of a headache on your side over a few $1,000s. Just pay the money and get the problem over with and consider it a lesson learned, right? Really think through why you're kind of holding people to the fire and why you're making these decisions and if it's worth it. More often than not, I've seen these kinds of setups where the business is just unwilling to communicate effectively, right? They don't like conflict. They don't want to tell the existing MSP that they're canceling or why. So they try to get the new MSP to just move them quietly so they can just say, oh, by the way, we left. Again, this is bad. That's the kind of behavior that probably led to the upsetness to begin with. Try to work through some of that stuff. Be transparent, be honest. Hey, we're businesses. We're making a business decision. That's okay. Everybody will respect each other and move on. If you are running into like a weird legal area, check your contract, have your legal team review it. What are your options? Like I said before, sometimes the MSP that you're with is bound to a vendor agreement. So you saying, I don't like your service, so I'm leaving early, fine, that might be able to get you out of the contract for services that we talked about. But if you're also buying like Microsoft 365, they now have an obligation to pay Microsoft for the remainder of the term, and they're probably going to try to hold you to that term. So even if you can't cancel everything, talk about what you can cancel and migrate away from. Try to find common ground in this kind of stuff. Make sure you understand what you own and what your MSP owns. If it's like a managed firewall or managed router or managed, access points and switches, if they physically own those devices and you're using them as a service, you don't have a right to them. So make sure you understand that your new MSP has to replace that stuff as part of the offboarding or their onboarding process. So really try to figure out what is what as you work through these problems. Um, Most of the time, and I'll say that, I mean, most times, 99% of the time, the technical challenges are not the hard part of these cutovers. Like, given enough time and resources, we have engineers who can figure out most technical challenges, whether it's, passwords being lost or not shared or not provided, or just questions about domain ownership or where data is. We can figure all that stuff out. That's our job. Most of the time, those things are just annoyances. So we try to just get them out of the way and we'll move through them pretty quickly. It's all the other stuff. It's the communication. It's the business side of things that ends up causing the havoc. So try to smooth that stuff out. And as a general rule, make sure you maintain some level of ownership and access to your network. MSPs are stewards of your data, right? We don't own your network typically. So you should always have some level of ownership and administrative access. We call these break glass accounts, right? So I don't want to make you, the business owner, a domain admin, but you should have a domain admin account locked up somewhere that in the event of a problem, you can take ownership of your network and hand it to another responsible party. If you don't have that, talk to your MSP, get that sorted out. All right. Now, this is my least favorite scenario, right? Where we're talking hostile takeovers when you have an internal IT person and you're trying to get rid of them and displace them with an MSP. I hate this scenario. It feels dirty, feels skeevy, like it's uncomfortable for everybody, and you end up as an MSP feeling like you're walking into a business and having to lie to people all the time, and that's a horrible way to get started with any relationship. So I advocate strongly against any business taking this approach. If you have an internal IT person and you think they're the wrong fit or they're not able to move your business forward, it happens. My suggestion typically is to move them into a co-managed role that you can try to make them successful. Either find them an MSP to support and fill in their gaps, set some framework around it. It might be limiting their role now. It might be putting some guardrails around them and decision making being pulled off of them, but try to figure out a way to make them successful. Most of the time, and again, there's always exceptions, but most of the time I found that when businesses are upset with their internal IT person, it's really just bad internal communication on both sides, right? The IT person doesn't know how to communicate to the executives about the needs of the organization in a way they understand. They don't know how to hear the IT person who's just talking tech stuff at them. And there's this gap that forms. Sometimes bringing in an MSP can help fix that because people like me know how to speak both languages. So I'll talk to the IT person and I'll talk to the executive and we find that common ground and we move the company forward. Give that option an opportunity if you can. If they are just the wrong person and you believe they're doing damage, then just be transparent about it and say, hey, we're going to, we don't think you're a good fit for here. We're going to let you go. This company is moving in. We'll pay you X dollars to do the transition and then you get a severance for leaving. Like, just be clean and business oriented about it. Like, most of the time that'll work. If they do throw a fit and end up on that 1% who just decide to, go scorched earth, yeah, you kick them out and the MSP just has to go the hard route of finding everything and all getting through all those technicalities. And they probably will. Like, I've never ran into a situation, luckily, where the internal IT person had, booby trapped the place or caused so much chaos that we couldn't unwind it relatively easily with or without them. And most of the time, the internal IT person isn't malicious. They're just in over their head. They don't know what to do. And finding them a clean way out, if they can't stay, usually works, right? Offering a severance, offering a payment for the transition, something like that usually smooths it out and they can move on with their lives. But yeah, transparency, honesty, easiest way to get through this. And it'll probably work out for the best. But again, this is the hardest one to work through typically. All right, so let's wrap this up. In summary, step one, figure out what you actually need and separate that from your wants. It's okay to want a lot of stuff, but understand that the price you get from a provider is going to be directly related to the things you're insisting that you need and the things that they believe you need. So if you say you need 15-minute response on everything and you need a person on site 8 hours a day, every day, your cost is going to reflect that and you're probably not going to like the cost. And for a lot of people, they don't need that stuff. They need 15-minute response on emergencies and they need somebody on site when remote just isn't working effectively. Make sure you meet with a couple different partners. You wouldn't marry the first person you meet usually. You shouldn't go with the first MSP that you talk to. Like, maybe they end up being the right one, but talk to a few. See what feels right. See who you get along with. See who matches your energy as a business. That's who you want to kind of go with. be honest and transparent about that stuff. It's okay to have high needs, right? It's okay to say, our company expects a 1 hour response time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for these VIP executives in our company. If you can't do that, then you can't be our partner. And that is a fair thing to need. Um, if you're not honest about that expectation and you're saying, no, 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 it's okay, we're totally fine waiting a couple days. And then once you sign the contract, you're mad that they're not responding, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting your partner up for the failure. So just be transparent about what your needs are, and you guys will find something that works out. And just be professional about it all. Communicate through the transition. Let all concerned parties know what's going on. Keep everybody on the same page. And usually it goes pretty smoothly. But take your time, find the right partners, be transparent about everything, and communicate, and you'll be off on the right foot with everybody. So have a great day, everybody. Good luck finding the correct MSP for you, and have a great day. Bye.